The champagne flute trembled in my hand as I stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom, watching my son Marcus cut his wedding cake while 300 guests applauded the man who had left me to die on the streets 6 months ago. My reflection in the gilded mirror showed a woman they wouldn't recognize. Designer dress, professionally styled silver hair, diamonds at my throat. But my hands, God, my hands still bore the scars of sleeping on frozen concrete. I was 68 years old, and I had clawed my way back from death itself to stand in this room. My fingers, gnarled now, each knuckle a testament to nights spent digging through dumpsters behind restaurants, each callus a memory of gripping cardboard boxes that served as both mattress and shield against the bitter wind, curled around the champagne flute. The crystal felt obscenely delicate compared to the styrofoam cups I'd learned to treasure during those months when I was invisible, when I was nothing, when I was less than the trash I sorted through for sustenance. After 7 decades on this earth, I had learned that invisibility isn't something that happens to you. It's something that's done to you, methodically, deliberately, by people who benefit from your erasure. I had built a fortress of silence over the years, brick by brick, with each phone call my children never returned, each birthday they forgot, each holiday invitation that mysteriously got lost in the mail. I told myself it was fine. I told myself they were busy. I told myself that's just how modern families work. But there was no exodus, no dramatic goodbye scene. Just a slow, insidious drift. A tide going out so gradually you don't notice you're drowning until the water covers your mouth and you can't scream anymore. The wound that festered deepest wasn't the cold or the hunger during those 6 months on the streets. It was the moment 3 days before they abandoned me, when I overheard my daughter Jennifer on the phone in my kitchen, laughing, actually laughing, as she said, "No, seriously, once we get her to sign the papers, we can put her somewhere cheap and pocket the difference. She's so out of it, she won't even know." I had stood frozen in the hallway, my hand on the doorframe, convincing myself I had misheard. Convincing myself my own child couldn't possibly be discussing me like I was a problem to be solved, an asset to be liquidated. Before I continue my story, I'd like to know who's on the other side listening to me. Comment your name and where you're watching from. And check if you're already subscribed to the channel. It helps me so much to keep bringing these real stories to you. Write in the comments where you're watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. How did I end up in this ballroom, dressed like royalty while my children celebrated, oblivious to the reckoning I'd brought with me in my vintage Chanel clutch? The answer lay in a discovery I'd made exactly 137 days ago, when I was still sleeping under the Morrison Street overpass. Started 8 months before tonight. Marcus and Jennifer appeared at my small apartment after nearly 2 years of minimal contact. They brought flowers. Roses, my favorites, which should have been my first warning because neither of them had remembered my favorite anything in decades. They sat on my worn couch, their expensive clothes looking obscene against my second-hand furniture, and they smiled. God, how they smiled. "Mom," Marcus said, taking my weathered hands in his manicured ones. "We've been talking, and we feel terrible about how distant we've been." His eyes, my ex-husband's eyes, cold and calculating even when they pretended warmth, didn't quite meet mine. "We want to make it right. We found this amazing assisted living community. Beautiful place, all paid for. You'd have friends, activities, everything." Jennifer nodded enthusiastically, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the afternoon light. "We've already handled all the arrangements, Mom. All you need to do is sign a few papers, just formalities really, and we can move you in next week. Won't that be wonderful?" I wanted to believe them so desperately that I ignored the voice screaming in the back of my mind. I ignored how they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking. I ignored how Jennifer's smile never quite reached her eyes, which were already cataloging my apartment, calculating square footage, estimating property values with the precision of an appraiser at an estate sale. I signed their papers. I trusted my children. I was a fool. The beautiful assisted living community turned out to be a fabrication. Instead, 3 days after signing, Marcus and Jennifer returned with a moving truck and 2 men I'd never seen before. They claimed there had been a mix-up with the facility, that I needed to stay with Marcus temporarily. But when we arrived at what I thought was his house, They pulled up to a Motel 6 on the outskirts of town. "Just for tonight, Mom," Marcus said, his voice devoid of the warmth he'd shown days earlier. "We'll sort everything out tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. I waited in that motel room for 3 days. My calls went to voicemail. My texts disappeared into the void. On the 4th morning, when I tried to check out, the clerk informed me the room had only been paid through the previous night. I had $17 in my wallet. Everything else had been in my apartment, which I no longer had keys to. That's when I found the first concrete piece of evidence, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. While gathering my few belongings, I found a crumpled paper in the pocket of the jacket Jennifer had brought me, supposedly one of my old jackets from the apartment. But this jacket had pockets with receipts that weren't mine, and tucked in the inner pocket was a photocopy of a document. My name was on it, along with my signature, that signature I'd given so trustingly, and beneath it bold numbers. Property value, $847,000. Sale projected, 60 days. Distribution, Morrison 50%, J. Morrison 50%. My apartment. They were selling my apartment. The apartment my husband Richard and I had bought 30 years ago, now worth nearly $1 million because of neighborhood gentrification. They had made me sign it over to them, disguised in those formality papers, and they were selling it to split the money between themselves. Standing in that motel room, my world tilted. Not a dramatic collapse, but a subtle shift. The way a photograph looks wrong when it's just slightly out of focus, and you can't quite identify what's off until you really look at it. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin, and I sat down hard on the bed that smelled of industrial bleach and other people's desperation. But I still didn't understand the full scope. I still thought it was just the apartment. I still thought maybe, somehow, there had been a genuine mix-up and this was a terrible misunderstanding that we could fix once I reached them. I was so pathetically, devastatingly wrong. And that's how I ended up here in this ballroom, with the weight of that photocopy now residing in my clutch alongside far more damning evidence. The champagne bubbles in my glass caught the chandelier light like tiny diamonds, and I watched Marcus lean down to kiss his bride, a bride whose wedding I'd financed without knowing it, with money stolen from my own accounts. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real horror, the discovery that nearly broke me, came later, on a cold November night when I'd been on the streets for nearly 3 months. After the motel evicted me, I spent 2 weeks sleeping on park benches, then bus stops, then finally accepting what I'd become, homeless. At 68 years old, I learned the hierarchy of survival. I learned which dumpsters had the freshest discarded food. I learned which shelters had space and which had waiting lists 3 months long. I learned that invisibility, which had been slowly growing throughout my relationship with my children, became absolute the moment I started sleeping rough. People looked through me. Not at me. Through me. As if I were a ghost haunting the corners of their comfortable lives. I survived on spite and confusion. I didn't understand why my children had done this. The apartment sale I'd discovered would net them nearly $800,000 split between them. Surely that was enough. Why completely abandon me? Why not even put me in an actual facility, even a cheap one? The answer came on day 83 of my street residency. I had taken shelter behind a coffee shop that closed at 6 p.m., and I was sorting through a box of personal items I'd managed to keep, photographs mostly, and a few documents I'd had in my purse when this nightmare began. At the bottom of the box, I found something I'd forgotten about, a small metal lockbox that had been in my closet. In the chaos of the motel, I'd grabbed it without thinking, assuming it held Richard's old cufflinks or costume jewelry. I'd lost the key weeks ago, but desperation and a rusty piece of metal I'd found in an alley gave me new skills. It took 40 minutes, my fingers bleeding from the effort, but I got that box open. Inside was a business-sized envelope, yellowed with age, and a small leather journal I didn't recognize. The envelope had Richard's handwriting on it. For Evelyn, open only if something happens to me. My husband had died 7 years ago. I'd never seen this envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a bank statement. The paper, in Richard's precise handwriting, read, My dearest Evelyn, I've kept this separate account as a surprise for your retirement. The children don't know about it. I wanted this to be just for us, for you when I'm gone. Live the life you deserve. All my love, Richard. The bank statement was dated 6 months before Richard's death. Account balance: $3,247,891. 42. $3 million. Richard had left me $3 million in a secret account, and I'd never known because I'd never found this envelope, and my children. The world didn't just tilt this time. Shattered. Every piece of the puzzle that had been floating in my confused, traumatized mind suddenly snapped into place with such violent clarity that I gasped aloud, the sound echoing in the empty alley. They knew. Somehow, my children knew about this money. That's why the elaborate setup. That's why the papers I'd signed hadn't just been about the apartment. I pulled out that crumpled photocopy I'd kept, studying it now with new eyes, and saw what I'd missed before. A second page I'd thought was just a duplicate, but was actually a separate document. Power of attorney, financial accounts, full access granted. I'd signed away access to all my financial accounts. They must have searched the house, found this envelope, found this account, and realized they could take it all if they just got me out of the way. And the easiest way to make an elderly woman disappear in America: make her homeless. No one looks for homeless elderly women. No one cares. We're invisible. The leather journal confirmed my worst fears. It was Richard's personal diary from his final year, and the entries I read by the dim light of the coffee shop's backdoor security lamp painted a picture of a man who'd loved me deeply but worried about our children's character. Jennifer called again asking for money. Said no. She hasn't visited her mother in 4 months. When did they become so cold? And later, Marcus asked about my will today. Didn't ask about his mother's health. Didn't ask about me. Just the will. I'm keeping the retirement account secret. Evelyn deserves security, and I don't trust them not to pressure her for it. Sitting in that alley at 68 years old, my body aching from months of sleeping on concrete, my hands shaking from malnutrition and cold, I made a decision. The despair that had been crushing me for months crystallized into something harder, sharper, infinitely more useful. Rage. Not the hot, impulsive rage of youth, but the cold, calculating rage that comes from 7 decades of living, of learning, of understanding exactly how the world works and how to make it work for you. If they wanted me invisible, I'd use that invisibility. If they thought I was broken, I'd let them think it while I planned. If they assumed I was too old, too weak, too stupid to fight back, they were about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. Because I had something they didn't know I had. $3 million and nothing left to lose. The next morning I went to the nearest public library. I cleaned up as best I could in their bathroom, and I sat down at a public computer. The bank statement had account numbers, and Richard's journal had passwords. Within an hour I'd accessed the account. It was all still there. My children hadn't found it yet, probably because they were still working through the process of taking over my other regular accounts. But here's what they didn't know. Richard had set up this account in my name only. Not joint. Just mine. The power of attorney papers I'd signed gave them access to review accounts and manage them on my behalf, but not to transfer money without my direct authorization. They could see it, but they couldn't touch it. They were probably building their case to have me declared incompetent, get guardianship, and then access everything legally. They were planning a long game. But they'd made one critical mistake. They assumed I was already dead or too broken to fight back. From that library computer I made 3 calls. The first was to a women's shelter that had space. The second was to a lawyer who specialized in elder financial abuse. I found her through a non-profit website, and she agreed to take my case pro bono once she heard the basics, with payment to come from eventual restitution. The third call was to a private investigator who'd worked with the lawyer before. I need proof, I told him. Not just documents. I need recordings, messages, evidence that will hold up in court and destroy them publicly. His fee was $5,000. I had $3 million. It was the best investment I ever made. Over the next 3 months, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. The women's shelter gave me a room and 3 meals a day. I'd lost 27 pounds during my time on the streets, and my hair had gone completely white from stress, but now I started to look human again. More than human. I started to look dangerous. The private investigator earned every penny. He found the text messages between Marcus and Jennifer, discussing how to handle the mother problem. He recorded their conversations, legal in our state as long as one party consents, and he'd posed as a potential buyer interested in my apartment, getting Marcus drunk at a bar and recording him bragging about the setup. "Old people are so fucking gullible," my son said on that recording. His words slurred but clear. "Manipulated our mom into signing everything over. She's probably dead in a ditch somewhere by now, honestly, and good riddance. Was just a drain anyway." My lawyer, Sarah Chen, was a force of nature. 53 years old, brilliant, and personally offended by what my children had done. "I see this too often," she told me in her office after reviewing everything the investigator had found. "Adult children viewing elderly parents as ATMs and inconveniences. But we're going to make an example of them." We filed a lawsuit: elder abuse, fraud, theft, emotional distress. We froze the sale of my apartment. We locked down my accounts. We filed criminal complaints with the district attorney's office. But Sarah advised waiting on making it all public. "They don't know you're alive yet," she said. "That's your advantage. Let them feel secure. Let them think they've won. Then we strike when they're most vulnerable, most exposed." "When?" "Yes. When they've spent money they don't have yet and can't pay back. When they're publicly celebrating. When the fall will hurt the most." She smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for a case like this. "When's your son's wedding?" I'd heard about the wedding through the investigator's surveillance. Marcus had invited 300 people to a lavish affair at the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, the most expensive venue in the city. He'd paid a $50,000 deposit, with a balance of $200,000 due the day after the wedding. He'd planned to pay with my money. Money he didn't have access to anymore, though he didn't know that yet. 6 months, I told Sarah. "The wedding is in 6 months. "Perfect," she said. "That gives us time to build an airtight case and plan the timing perfectly. Let him have his wedding. Let him think he's gotten away with it. Then we'll show him what it means to steal from someone who spent 7 decades learning patience." Those 6 months were the strangest of my life. I lived in a modest hotel on Sarah's advice, paid from my secret account. I worked with a therapist to process the trauma of my months on the street. I worked with Sarah to prepare testimony. I met with the district attorney's office as they built criminal cases. I worked with a financial advisor to understand exactly how much my children had already stolen or planned to steal. The number, when we finally calculated it, was staggering. $847,000 from the apartment sale they'd attempted, $3. $2 million from the secret account they'd discovered but couldn't access yet, $67,000 from my regular checking and savings they'd drained before I froze everything, and $34,000 in credit cards they'd opened in my name. $4 million. They'd tried to steal $4 million from their mother, and they'd been willing to let me die in the street to do it. And do you know what Jennifer had spent her stolen money on? The investigator found out. A Mercedes, a vacation home in Napa, plastic surgery, designer clothes. She'd been posting it all on Instagram, showing off her successful lifestyle, never mentioning that it was built on fraud and matricide, because that's what it was really. They'd killed me without actually killing me. They'd just let the streets and the cold do their work. Marcus had been more conservative with his spending. He'd put most into investments and saved for his wedding. But he'd also bought a boat. A 40-foot yacht named Easy Living. The investigator got me photos. I hung one on the wall of my hotel room, looking at it every morning as I prepared for what was coming. Sometimes late at night, I'd stand at my hotel window overlooking the city, and I'd think about those nights under the overpass. The cold that seeped into your bones and never really left. The fear of falling asleep because someone might attack you or steal your few possessions. The shame of being invisible, of being nothing, of being discarded like trash. And then I'd think about Marcus and Jennifer in their comfortable homes, sleeping in their comfortable beds, never once wondering if their mother was dead or alive. Never once feeling guilt. Never once questioning whether what they'd done was monstrously, incomprehensibly evil. The rage would return, but it was a cold rage now. A useful rage. The rage of someone who'd survived the unsurvivable and was ready to make sure it meant something. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah filed all our paperwork with the court. Lawsuits, restraining orders, asset freezes, everything. But she requested that service be delayed until the day of the wedding. The judge, a 72-year-old woman who'd read every word of our evidence, approved the request. "I've been on the bench 30 years, Judge Morrison told us in chambers, and this is one of the most heartless things I've seen. Make sure they understand the consequences of their actions." I spent those 2 weeks preparing in a different way. I worked with a stylist who helped me choose the perfect dress. Elegant, expensive, powerful. A deep navy that made my white hair look regal rather than old. I worked with a hairdresser who shaped my hair into a sleek bob. I bought diamonds, real ones, from the account Richard had left me, because I wanted to walk into that ballroom looking like exactly what I was. A woman with $3 million who'd survived their murder attempt. On the morning of the wedding, I woke early. I put on my armor piece by piece. The dress, the shoes, the jewelry. I did my makeup carefully, highlighting the cheekbones that had become more pronounced during my months of starvation. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The last time my children had seen me, I was wearing a second-hand coat and carrying $17. Today I look like I could buy and sell them. Which, legally speaking, I could. Sarah met me at the hotel at 4 p.m. The wedding started at 6, but we had work to do first. 2 process servers waited in her car. Professional, discreet, carrying envelopes that would destroy my children's lives. "Last chance to change your mind," Sarah said, though her eyes told me she knew I wouldn't. "I spent 83 days on the streets," I said quietly. "I ate from dumpsters. I slept on concrete in January. I was invisible while they bought boats and Mercedes with my money. Well, there's no changing my mind." "Good," Sarah said. "Then let's go serve some papers." We arrived at the grand ballroom at 5:30. The venue was stunning. Crystal chandeliers, silk drapes, flowers everywhere. An ice sculpture in the shape of swans. A champagne fountain. A 10-tier cake that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. All of it paid with a deposit from money my children had stolen, with a balance meant to be paid with money from accounts they no longer had access to. The process servers waited outside, watching through the windows as the guests arrived. We'd timed it perfectly. They'd serve the papers at 6:15, 15 minutes after the ceremony started. Public enough to cause maximum embarrassment, legal enough that no one could claim improper service. But I wanted to watch their faces. After everything they'd done to me, I wanted to see the moment they realized they'd lost. So at 5:50 I walked through those ballroom doors. The room was filling with guests, people in designer clothes drinking expensive champagne and talking about Marcus and his bride in those polite, superficial ways people do at weddings. I took a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, my hand trembling slightly. And then I saw them. Marcus stood near the cake, laughing with his groomsmen. His face flushed with happiness and self-satisfaction. Jennifer was across the room, her new face lifted and tight from surgery, showing off her engagement ring. She'd gotten engaged herself recently, funded by my money. They were radiant, successful, surrounded by friends and the trappings of wealth. They thought they'd won. They thought I was dead or at least permanently gone. They'd completely erased me from their lives. I took a sip of champagne and walked deeper into the ballroom. A few people glanced at me, curious about this elegant older woman they didn't recognize. I smiled politely, finding a position near the side wall where I could see everything. The ceremony started right on time. Marcus and his bride stood under an arch of white roses that probably cost $5,000. The officiant began speaking about love and commitment and family. I almost laughed at the irony. At 6:12 I saw the ballroom doors open. 2 process servers entered, professional and purposeful. They moved through the crowd toward Marcus and Jennifer respectively, each carrying large manila envelopes. The servers reached their targets simultaneously. I watched as they approached, as they spoke the required words. Marcus Morrison, you've been served. Jennifer Morrison, you've been served. The envelopes were taken with confusion. Marcus actually laughed, probably thinking it was some kind of wedding joke. Jennifer frowned, her surgically enhanced face struggling to show full emotion. Then they opened the envelopes and began reading. I wish I could adequately describe the progression of emotions that crossed their faces. Confusion first, then disbelief, then growing horror, then pure absolute panic. Marcus's hands started shaking so badly the papers rustled audibly. Jennifer went white, truly white, the blood draining from her face in a way that was almost comical. She looked up, scanning the room wildly, and her eyes locked on mine. For a moment, we stared at each other across that lavish ballroom. I raised my champagne glass in a small, deliberate toast. He screamed. Actually screamed. That's impossible. You're dead. You're supposed to be dead. The room fell silent. 300 guests turned to stare at Jennifer, then followed her gaze to me. Marcus looked up, saw me, and dropped his papers entirely. They scattered across the floor like accusatory white leaves. Hello, Marcus. Hello, Jennifer, I said clearly, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. Surprised to see me alive. The officiant had stopped mid-sentence. The bride was looking between Marcus and me with growing confusion and horror. The guests were murmuring, pulling out phones, sensing drama. I walked forward through the parted crowd. People moved aside like I was royalty, or like I was a ghost, which I suppose in their minds I was. I stopped about 10 feet from Marcus, close enough that he could see me clearly. Close enough that he could see I was healthy, well-dressed, and very much not dead in a ditch somewhere. You left me on the streets to die, I said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. You stole nearly $4 million from me. You committed fraud, elder abuse, and financial exploitation. And you thought you'd gotten away with it. Mom, Marcus started, his voice strangled. Don't call me that, I said sharply. You lost the right to call me that when you chose money over basic human decency. I turned to address the room, projecting my voice. My children tried to murder me. Not with a gun or poison, that would be too obvious. They did it the American way. They made me homeless at 68 years old, took everything I owned, and left me to freeze on the streets. Marcus just said on a recording 3 months ago that he hoped I was dead in a ditch. Jennifer posted about her new Mercedes the same day I was eating from a dumpster to survive. The gasps from the crowd were satisfying, but not as satisfying as watching my children's faces. Marcus had tears running down his cheeks now. Not from remorse, I knew, but from fear. Jennifer was shaking her head, mouthing no, no, no over and over. The lawsuits you've just been served detail everything, I continued. The fraud, the theft, the elder abuse. The district attorney's office has also filed criminal charges. You're both facing felony charges, and I have recordings, text messages, witness testimony, and paper trails proving everything. I paused, took another sip of champagne. The bubbles danced on my tongue, tasting like vindication. The apartment you sold. That sale has been reversed. You'll be returning every penny with interest. The accounts you drained. You're repaying all of it with penalties. The credit cards you opened in my name. Those debts are now yours along with identity theft charges. And the account you found but couldn't access. My husband's gift to me of $3 million. You'll never see a penny of it. Jennifer found her voice, shrill and desperate. You can't do this. We're your children. We're family. You stopped being my family when you left me on the streets like garbage, I said. You wanted me invisible. You wanted me erased. You wanted me dead. But I survived. And now everyone knows exactly what you are. Marcus's bride. Poor woman, she'd had no idea what she was marrying into. backed away from him, horror on her face. Several guests were filming now. This would be all over social media within hours. Their reputations were being destroyed in real time. The wedding you're at right now? Continued. The venue costs $300,000 total. Marcus paid $50,000 as a deposit using money he stole from me. The balance is due tomorrow, and he doesn't have it because his accounts are frozen. So you're all at a wedding that's about to be repossessed. How fitting. Marcus collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands. There's Martha, 71, whose grandson emptied her retirement account to fuel a gambling addiction. There's Robert, 66, whose daughter forged his signature on a reverse mortgage and disappeared with the proceeds. There's Chan, 74, whose son convinced him to sign over his business, then institutionalized him to avoid interference. Every story is different. Every story is the same. Family seeing opportunity instead of love. Age seen as weakness instead of wisdom. Trust exploited as gullibility. But we fight back. We win most cases. We make sure the perpetrators face consequences. We make sure the victims know they're not alone, not crazy, not weak. They're survivors of a particular kind of violence. The violence of betrayal wrapped in familial obligation. I think about Richard often. About how he tried to protect me even from beyond the grave, squirreling away that money because he saw in our children what I refused to see. I used to be angry with him for not telling me outright what he observed, what he feared. But I understand now. How do you tell someone that their children, the babies they birthed and raised and loved with every fiber of their being, are capable of such monstrous cruelty? I can't. Some truths are too devastating to speak aloud until they prove themselves. Richard left me more than money. He left me proof that I was loved, truly loved, by at least one person in this world. That account wasn't just financial security. It was a love letter. It was validation. It was him saying, "You matter. You deserve security. You deserve to be taken care of." My children saw $3 million. Richard saw my worth. The difference between those two perspectives is everything. I keep his journal in a safe deposit box now, along with the original documents from that life-changing discovery in the alley. Sometimes I visit them, running my fingers over his handwriting, remembering the man who loved me enough to plan for my future even as he faced his own mortality. The paper smells old now, faintly musty, but the love in those words is as fresh as the day he wrote them. "Live the life you deserve," he wrote. And finally, after 69 years of living for others, of making myself small, of being the invisible support system for everyone else's dreams, I travel now. I've seen Paris, Rome, Tokyo. All the places Richard and I planned to visit but never did because we were busy raising children, building businesses, accumulating the wealth that those children would eventually try to steal. I take cooking classes. I attend theater performances. I've joined a book club where the youngest member is 62 and we drink wine and argue passionately about literature and life. I'm living. Finally, completely, unapologetically living. And yes, some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, back in that alley, back under that overpass, the concrete pressing against my spine and the cold seeping into my bones. The trauma doesn't just disappear because justice was served. My therapist says I have PTSD, which makes sense. 6 months of surviving on the streets at 68 years old leaves scars that no court judgment can heal. But I'm healing anyway. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating. Those 83 days on the streets are part of my story now, woven into the fabric of who I am. They taught me things I never wanted to know but needed to learn. That I'm stronger than I believed, that survival is a skill you can develop at any age, that rock bottom is both an ending and a beginning. They also taught me that the world is full of invisible people. Once you've been invisible yourself, you can't unsee them. I see them everywhere now. The homeless man on the corner that everyone walks past, the elderly woman sitting alone in the coffee shop that no one talks to, the teenager working the register that customers speak to like furniture rather than a human being. I see them and I acknowledge them. Smile. Greeting. Conversation. A reminder that they exist, that they matter, that they're visible to someone. Costs me nothing and means everything. Because that was the worst part of those 83 days. Not the hunger or the cold or the fear. The invisibility. The feeling that you've been erased from the world, that your existence has been deemed irrelevant, that you could disappear entirely and the world wouldn't even notice the empty space you left behind. My children tried to erase me. But I'm still here. I'm still visible. I'm still relevant. And I will never, ever let anyone make me invisible again. The legal consequences continue to unfold. Marcus filed for bankruptcy last year. His assets liquidated to pay restitution. He lives in a studio apartment now, working a job that barely covers his expenses. The life he tried to build on stolen money collapsed completely. Jennifer moved to another state, trying to escape her reputation. But the internet is forever. A simple Google search of her name brings up articles about the case, her mugshot, her crime. They wanted my money to build their futures. Instead, their crime destroyed any future they might have had. Is that justice? Does it satisfy me? Some days. Other days I just feel tired. Tired of the anger, tired of the battle, tired of being defined by what was done to me rather than who I choose to be. But then I get a call from the foundation. Another elderly person needs help. Another family has stolen everything. Another person is invisible and desperate and thinks they have no options. And I remember why this matters. I remember that my visibility, hard-won and maintained through sheer determination, can help others become visible too. So I take the call. I offer resources. I connect them with Sarah or one of the other lawyers we work with. I share my story so they know survival is possible. I remind them that being old doesn't mean being powerless, that being betrayed doesn't mean being broken, that losing everything doesn't mean you can't rebuild. 'Cause I did. At 68 years old, homeless and alone, I rebuilt from nothing. If I can do it, others can too. That's the legacy I want. Not the bitter old woman who was betrayed by her children, though that's true. Not the victim who suffered and nearly died, though that's also true. But the survivor who turned trauma into purpose, who used her pain to prevent others' pain, who refused to let cruelty have the final word. I think about that moment in the ballroom often. The look on Marcus's face when he saw me. The scream that came from Jennifer when she realized I was alive. The 300 guests watching my children's carefully constructed lies collapse in real time. The crystal chandelier reflecting light off my diamonds. Diamonds I'd bought with the money they tried to steal, worn in the room they'd paid for with fraud. It was theatrical. It was public. It was cruel in its own way. And it was exactly what they deserved. Some people have told me I should have handled it privately. That a public confrontation was beneath me, was petty, was vindictive. But those people didn't sleep on frozen concrete while their children bought boats. Those people didn't eat from dumpsters while their children posted Instagram photos of expensive vacations. Those people weren't erased, invisible, left for dead. The public humiliation was part of the justice. They tried to make me disappear quietly, shamefully, without witness. I made sure their cruelty was witnessed by everyone. I made sure they couldn't hide behind closed doors and family privacy. I made sure the world saw exactly who they were. Because that's the thing about invisibility as a weapon. It only works in darkness. Once you shine light on it, once you make people see what's happening, the weapon loses its power. I made them visible in their cruelty the same way they'd made me invisible in my suffering. An eye for an eye. Perhaps. But also justice in its purest form. Consequences that match actions, visibility that exposes truth. Do I regret it? Never. Would I do it again? In a heartbeat. Would I recommend it to other victims? That depends. Public confrontation isn't for everyone. Some people need privacy to heal. Some people need quiet justice. Some people need to walk away without looking back. But for me, I needed them to see me. To see that I'd survived. To see that they'd failed. To see the consequences of their choices reflected in 300 pairs of eyes, in countless phone cameras, in newspaper articles and social media posts that would follow them forever. I needed to be visible in my victory the way I'd been invisible in my suffering. And God help me, it felt good. After months of powerlessness, of being acted upon rather than acting, of being the victim of others' choices, it felt devastatingly, righteously good to have power again. To make choices. To determine outcomes. To be the author of my own story rather than a character in theirs. The weight of that champagne glass in my hand, standing in that ballroom, was the weight of agency returned. The bubbles dancing on my tongue tasted like autonomy. The look of horror on my children's faces reflected my own visibility back at me. I was seen. I was heard. Mattered. After 68 years of slowly disappearing, I exploded back into existence. Was it revenge? Was it also justice? Are those two things mutually exclusive? I don't think so. Not in cases like this. Not when the legal system moves slowly and social consequences happen immediately. Not when the crime is erasure and the punishment is exposure. The foundation keeps me busy. We've expanded to 4 states now, with plans for national coverage within 2 years. We've lobbied for stronger elder abuse laws, better protections for vulnerable adults, mandatory reporting requirements for financial institutions. We've trained hundreds of bank employees, social workers, and healthcare providers to recognize signs of financial exploitation. We've made a difference. A measurable, quantifiable difference in the world. And every time we help someone, every time we recover stolen money or prosecute an abusive family member or simply provide emotional support to someone who thought they were alone, I feel Richard's presence. I feel his approval. I feel like I'm honoring the gift he gave me, not just the money but the opportunity to matter, to contribute, to be more than just a victim. He saw my worth when I couldn't see it myself. Now I help others see their own worth when their families have tried to convince them they have none. That's the real legacy. Not the money, not the revenge, not even the foundation itself. The legacy is visibility, for me, for the people we help, for the issue itself. Elder financial abuse is no longer something that happens in shadows and silence. It's a recognized crime with recognized consequences. We did that. I did that. This 70-year-old woman who once ate from dumpsters helped change laws and shift consciousness. My children tried to make me nothing. Instead, they made me into something I never dreamed I could be. An advocate, a fighter, a voice for the voiceless. The irony is sharp enough to cut glass. I still have nightmares. Still wake up thinking I'm back in that alley, cold and alone and desperate. Still feel phantom hunger pains even though I eat 3 good meals every day now. Still flinch at raised voices or sudden movements. Still check my bank accounts compulsively, making sure the money is still there, that it's real, that I'm not about to lose everything again. Trauma leaves marks. Some visible, some not. Mine are both. My hands still bear scars from those months on the street. From digging through dumpsters, from forcing open that lockbox, from scraping frozen concrete as I tried to find stable sleeping positions. My hair never returned to its original dark brown. The stress turned it white and it stayed that way. I'm 30 pounds heavier than I was at my lowest, but still 10 pounds lighter than I was before this nightmare began. But the invisible scars are deeper. The inability to fully trust anyone. The hypervigilance about money and security. The way I tense up around large family gatherings, even when they're not my family. The knee-jerk suspicion when someone is too nice or too helpful without apparent motive. My therapist says these are normal trauma responses. That healing isn't linear. That I'll carry these scars forever, but they'll hurt less over time. Will inform my decisions rather than control them. Hope she's right. Most days I believe her. Some days the anger resurfaces with such force that it scares me. Hot and immediate and consuming in a way that makes me understand how people commit crimes of passion. Those are the days I call my support group, attend an extra therapy session, channel the anger into foundation work. Because that anger, as righteous as it is, as justified as it is, can't be allowed to consume me. It's fuel, not destination. It powers my work, but it can't become my identity. I refuse to be defined by what they did to me. I refuse to let their cruelty be the most important thing about me. I am more than a victim. I am more than a survivor. I am a mother who loved her children even though they didn't deserve it. I am a wife who was truly loved by a good man. I am a friend, an advocate, a philanthropist, a fighter. I am a woman who learned at 68 that she was capable of surviving the unsurvivable. I am Evelyn Morrison, and I am visible. That's the triumph, really. Not the money recovered or the justice served or even the foundation built. The triumph is that I'm still here, still visible, still mattering in a world that tried very hard to erase me. My children wanted me gone. I'm still here. They wanted me silent. I'm louder than ever. They wanted my money. I used it to help others they'd never care about. They wanted to erase me from their lives and their narratives. I made myself the central figure in a story that will follow them forever. Every choice they made to diminish me, I've countered with choices that amplify me. That's power. That's agency. That's justice. And some days, when the sun hits my Riverview windows just right and I'm drinking good coffee in my comfortable home surrounded by evidence of a life well lived, it's also peace. Not the peace of forgiveness. The peace of moving forward. The peace of building something meaningful from the wreckage of betrayal. The peace of knowing that I turned their weapon of invisibility into my armor of visibility. I've been asked if I would ever reconcile with Marcus and Jennifer. If I would ever let them back into my life, accept their apologies, rebuild a relationship. The answer is no. Unequivocally, permanently, no. Because here's what people don't understand about certain kinds of betrayal. They're not mistakes. They're revelations. My children didn't accidentally hurt me. They systematically, deliberately, methodically tried to destroy me for their own financial gain. That's not a momentary lapse in judgment. That's character. That's who they fundamentally are. And you can't have a relationship with people who've proven they'll try to kill you if it's convenient. But they're your children, people say. As if biology creates an obligation to accept abuse. As if DNA means I owe them infinite chances to hurt me. As if motherhood requires martyrdom. I was a good mother. I loved them. I sacrificed for them. I gave them every opportunity one could afford and many I couldn't. And they responded by viewing me as an obstacle to inheritance, rather than a human being worthy of basic decency. That's not my failure. That's theirs. No. No reconciliation. No second chances. No, but family is everything sentimentality. They are legally my children. They are not functionally my family. Family doesn't try to murder you. Family doesn't leave you to freeze on streets. Family doesn't steal your entire life savings while hoping you die alone and forgotten. Biology doesn't trump betrayal. And I refuse to let societal expectations about motherhood guilt me into accepting crumbs of remorse from people who stole my entire life. I have a new family now. Sarah, who fought for me when I had nothing. The other survivors in my support group, who understand without explanation what it means to be betrayed by blood. The volunteers and board members of the foundation, who dedicate their time to preventing what happened to me from happening to others. The elderly woman I met at a homeless shelter who's now my neighbor and dear friend. Our shared experience of invisibility creating a bond deeper than biology ever did. These are my people. This is my family. Chosen, earned, built on mutual respect rather than obligatory relation. And they see me, truly see me, not as a wallet or an inconvenience or an obstacle, but as Evelyn, complex, flawed, strong, valuable Evelyn. That's the family I want, the family I deserve, the family I've built from the ashes of the one that tried to burn me alive. I'm 69 years old, and I've learned that it's never too late to start over. Never too late to recognize that toxic is toxic regardless of DNA. Never too late to choose yourself over people who chose greed over you. Some people think that's selfish. I think it's survival. I think it's sanity. I think it's the most important lesson I've learned in nearly 7 decades on this planet. You cannot love people into being decent, and you don't owe loyalty to those who've weaponized your love against you. My children taught me that lesson. It cost me 6 months of homelessness, 83 days of survival hell, and the complete destruction of my illusions about family. But I learned it. And I'll never forget it. The foundation is hosting a gala next month. 500 people, all supporters of our mission. I'm giving the keynote speech. They've asked me to tell my story, the full story, publicly and on record in a way that will be shared nationally. I've agreed. Not because I want the attention, but because invisibility thrives in silence. The more stories we tell, the more we normalize speaking about elder abuse, the harder it becomes for perpetrators to operate in shadows. So I'll stand on that stage in front of 500 people, and I'll tell them about the champagne at my son's wedding, and I'll work backward through the betrayal, through the homelessness, through the discovery, through the planning, through the revenge. I'll tell them about the concrete and the dumpsters and the cold that never quite left my bones. I'll tell them about Richard's love letter hidden in a lockbox. I'll tell them about learning to be invisible and then choosing to be seen. And I'll tell them that justice is possible, that consequences exist, that being old doesn't mean being powerless, that survival isn't just about living through trauma but about transforming it into meaning. I'm nervous about the speech, about being that visible, that vulnerable, that public. But I'm also ready, because this story, my story, isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to every elderly person who's been robbed by their children, every homeless person who's been made invisible by society, every victim who's been told to be quiet, to forgive, to let it go. This story is for them. For us. For everyone who's ever been erased and fought their way back to visibility. And if telling it helps even one person, one elderly parent who's being manipulated, one adult child who's considering financial exploitation, one prosecutor deciding whether to pursue charges, one judge determining sentences, then the vulnerability is worth it. Because that's the thing about surviving hell. It obligates you. Not legally but morally. When you make it out, when you claw your way back from erasure to existence, you have a responsibility to reach back and help pull others forward. I didn't ask for that responsibility. I didn't want the visibility that came with being a victim of such spectacular betrayal. But I have it now and I refuse to waste it. So I'll give that speech. I'll tell that story. I'll be visible in my survival and vocal in my advocacy. I'll use every platform, every dollar, every moment of attention to make sure what happened to me becomes harder to do to others. That's the legacy. That's the meaning I've wrested from the nightmare. That's how I've turned their weapon of invisibility into my shield of advocacy. My children tried to erase me from the world. Instead, they made me unforgettable. And every day I wake up in my comfortable bed, in my secure home, surrounded by people who genuinely care about me, living a life of purpose and meaning, is a day I've won. Every day I'm visible is a day they've lost. That's not bitterness. That's truth. That's justice. That's the natural consequence of trying to destroy someone who turns out to be indestructible. I survived. Thrived. Matter. And no matter what they took from me, they couldn't take that. Thank you for listening to my story all the way to the end. This was my truth, every word of it real. These are stories of real people who faced impossible situations and found the strength to fight back and reclaim their lives. If this story moved you, if it made you think or feel or question, please subscribe to the channel. I share real stories of survival, justice, and resilience every week here. Stories that matter. Stories that need to be told. And I want to know, have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Have you ever had to choose between family and self-preservation? What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted them publicly? Or would you have handled it differently? Do you think I went too far with the wedding confrontation? Or was it exactly what they deserved? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Your stories matter to me. Your experiences, your perspectives, your struggles. They're all part of this larger conversation about family, trust, betrayal, and justice. We're building a community here of people who refuse to be silenced, who refuse to accept abuse just because it comes from family, who understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who hurt you. You're not alone in this. Whatever you're facing, whoever has betrayed you, however invisible you feel, there are others who understand. There are resources available. There are people willing to help. You don't have to suffer in silence. You don't have to accept cruelty wrapped in obligation. Click on the videos appearing on your screen now for more powerful stories of people who refused to stay victims, who fought back against injustice, who found their voices when the world tried to silence them. Stories that will make you think, make you feel, maybe even inspire you to make changes in your own life. Until the next story, stay strong, stay visible, and remember that you matter. Always, you matter.